while the Shattuck Visitor Center, which is our public visitor center, is closed at the moment during this, what we have tried to do is take the information that we normally provide at the visitor center and spread it out into the park in a certain way, and also use this time as an opportunity to educate. So we have, working with our public partners, we have designed and put out 40 of these signs throughout the Emerald Necklace in all of the parks that both remind people about the importance of social distancing at this time, also the importance of wearing a mask. And finally, we have also maps of the Emerald Necklace and information that they can find, and they can get to our free web link, mobile tour link. You don't even have to download anything. It's not even an app, it's just a link, and you can learn all about the Emerald Necklace parks and perhaps discover parts that you haven't been to before, and will help people spread out a little bit more right now, because what we noticed is that sometimes people go to the parks they know, but there are 1,100 acres. We can all spread out, and there's room for many people in these parks if we use all of them. So again, we have these signs out that are, I think, helping people understand a little bit more about, how to behave at these times, but we're definitely seeing people overall actually doing a really good job wearing masks and, trying to space. Also, we have information both on our website and on our social media that can tell you how to behave, but also what things are that they can do while you're at home or out in the park today. So there's a Here For You website that I hope many of you can check out with different things to do. Again, this is a link to our mobile tour guide, which you can read from anywhere on the planet that you have access to the internet. You don't even have to be here to read it, like my mother. Also educational videos, the life cycle of different things. So, perhaps you're looking for something to do with your kid this summer or something for them to do at home. I really encourage you to check it out. We have a symphony that was written for the necklace, a lot of fun things. So I encourage you to check it out. And again, one of the obviously major components of the parks remaining open is the dedication of, clearly amazing healthcare workers have been doing amazing work for, right now during COVID, but the folks that are less mentioned are the park staff. They're in the parks every day, making sure that the spaces can be as safe as possible, clean as possible. And our hearts really go out to all those folks that are working extremely hard. So just again, want to say thank you. One of the things you're going to start to see, I think, over the summer, and you've seen a little bit around the country, and I hope that we'll be able to do more of that here in Boston, is finding ways to make space for people, maybe in and around parks, perhaps through neighborhoods. And that's something I'm very interested to continue to work with the city and the state and others on, if we can make more space so people can travel more safely between the parks. Another thing that is going on this summer that is very exciting, we normally have about 25 kids in our Green Team program, but this year, working with the city of Boston, we asked and they happily agreed to increase our enrollment up to 100 kids this summer. So while we are going to be doing, likely all of it virtually, perhaps we'll be able to do a couple of things, but we really have to be very safe. So the assumption right now is the summer is going to be almost completely, if not completely, virtual. We are going to be able to have a lot more kids in that program. We're very excited. These are jobs for students. This is part of the income that a lot of folks need. So I'm really happy that the city and all of our partners have been so supportive of this. Again, our Olmsted Tree Society work, we're hitting an important milestone. We will now be pruning almost 2,000 trees this year to reach our goal of having inspected or pruned almost all 9,000 trees in our inventory. And that project, which is a partnership between the city of Boston, the town of Brookline, DCR, and the Conservancy, is really unique nationally. And I really am very, very proud of the work that we all do together with those amazing partners, tracking our work quarterly and making sure that we're all working together on all of those projects. We don't do our work alone. We work with a lot of amazing volunteers. I'm just going to recognize two of them right now. Susan Logan has been a wonderful person who found us, heard we were moving part of our staff into the Curley House, which is a historic house in Jamaica Plain, to allow our visitor center to provide more space for visitors. And Susan has provided her talent, her energies and donated amazing furniture to help make the first floor of the house feel like a house, feel like a place that we could work from. So I really appreciate Susan doing that. And Elena Saporta is a member of our Board of Overseers, comes to us from the Boston Society of Landscape Architects, and she has provided tremendous amount of expertise, both with our tree planting program, also creating maps and diagrams as we work on discussions around Franklin Park and open space and the Shattuck property, and thinking about how we can satisfy a lot of needs for open space. Also, she personally helped plant a tremendous number of ferns just this week in front of the Fenway Visitor Center. We really can't do this except for people like this. If you want to volunteer, there are many opportunities. You can just reach out to us through the website. So, you know, we have over 1,000 volunteers a year, but these are two of the ones that have really done such amazing work for us this year. I wanted to briefly, well, here's an aerial photo where you can see sort of the breadth of really what the emerald necklace is. I think sometimes, you know, you don't see it from the sky. You don't realize the sort of extent of the necklace and how much a part of this, it's really our landscape under our feet. And, you know, when the things kind of happen that are happening today, I think a lot of us might have taken these spaces for granted, but I think over the last couple of months, we have all started to, I think, realize how essential and important they are to both us, but also to our democracy. I want to definitely spend some time talking about the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement and our role in continuing to support these efforts in a more deliberate way than perhaps we have in the past. I released a statement of solidarity on behalf of the organization a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not going to go through all of that, but I just wanted to give you some images of some of the things that we've been seeing that we think are really, really important. The loss of Black lives in recent weeks and throughout the long history of racial injustice saddens us and outrages us. And, you know, we condemn unequivocally these racist acts and the social structures that underlie them. And we know that a lot of times, you know, a lot of these spatial systems are all intertwined with these things. And so it's important that we also work to, you know, to better our democracy and better the lives of everyone in it. Parks, in fact, should be our most democratic spaces, and at their best there are. And I think we saw one example of that when we saw the demonstration in Franklin Park a couple of weeks ago. We commit to working with all members of our community, particularly communities of color, to inform our programs, our partnerships, our board, our staff, our mission, and our beliefs over the next several weeks and months. And I know the work will probably never be done, but I'm really, really glad that we're going to have so many people to help us improve and be better. So I invite you all to be part of that. There are a couple of forums coming up where I think we're going to be able to have hopefully a dialogue that leads us down this road. The two I'm mentioning right here, I definitely encourage people to join. There's one on June 19th. That's Juneteenth, this coming Friday, 2 days from now, from 2 to 4. And that is going to be, we're going to be joined by Sarah Carr of Northeastern University and Catherine Morris of the Boston Art and Music Soul Fest, BAMS Fest, for those of you that have only heard it as an acronym. And on the 25th, the Boston Foundation is also having a forum entitled Green Space, White Space, Racial Equality in Public Spaces. And we're going to be joined, I will be there with Stephen Bailey from the Design Studio for Social Intervention, and Kenneth Bailey from the Design Studio for Social Intervention, and Stephen Gray from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. So I really hope that many of you can join us. I think those links are in the chat, so you can find out more about how to join if you'd like to sign up for those in advance, and also be listed on our website. So in each annual meeting, we like to feature one main project that we're working on, just so you can kind of dive into something big. And Charles Gate is definitely big and important. I think one of the things that is most surprising about this is I think a lot of people don't even realize that it actually was part of the Emerald Necklace and is a park. It is beneath the Bowker Overpass today. A lot of people likely go by it and don't realize that it was, in fact, the first piece of the Emerald Necklace. And those photos that Jamie ran at the beginning that Parker James has provided us show you, how amazing that space was in the past. So it is highly compromised. It was the first piece of the park built by Frederick Law Olmsted. Here I have some before pictures. Later you'll see some other images of what these areas can be, but you can see sort of the state that at times it is in today. These are from the winter. It looks greener during the rest of the year, I swear. But this project aims to recreate what Olmsted intended, providing access and connections throughout, from the Back Bay Fens to what is today the Esplanade. And we really look forward to working with all of you to achieve that. I'm also very happy about the collaboration and partnership that we have with the Esplanade Association and the Friends of the Public Garden, who have all participated in these conversations and this dialogue. I think that it is through all of those connections that we're really going to make this project a reality. The two public agencies that are most critical to this are the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, also known as DCR, which owns the parkland, and Mass DOT, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, which owns and manages the overpass and Storrow Drive and those other major arterials in the area. So it is a collaboration that we are very, very proud of. We've been working with them for many months, and we have regular meetings, and the project has actually achieved some really amazing milestones, and I will let Dan and Marie tell you about those. So this is an image of basically, our most important partner in this project. The Charles Gay Alliance is a community organization that was founded 2 years ago that has brought tremendous amount of energy, vision, and heart to this effort. And the Emerald Necklace Conservancy is partnering with them on this work. So we have public meetings together, we fundraise together, we work to improve and program and clean up the site together. And it's a really, really tremendous project that can only work when you actually have the neighbors and everyone kind of together in this effort. So I really have to commend them. Pam Beal and Parker James were the co-founders of the Charles Gate Alliance. And this is not the first time that people have tried to improve this park, but I think this is the time that it's going to work because of the relationships that we have forged. We have, so I'm gonna actually turn it over now to Garrett, and then let Dan and Marie go more into the details of the design. Garrett Dash Nelson is the curator of maps and director of geographic scholarship with the Leventhal Map and Education Center at the Boston Public Library, which is where we were hoping to have this presentation in the first place. I'm so glad that Garrett was still able to join us. He brings a wealth of historical knowledge and also context to this conversation, because of course Charles Gate isn't just a spot on a map. It relates to a much larger regional system, and I think Garrett's going to be able to help us understand that a little bit more. He's a historical geographer whose work explores the relationship between landscape, community, and place, with a focus on the landscape history of Boston and New England. So this is his wheelhouse. Garrett, thank you very much. I hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Karen. Everybody can hear me all right? And now the next trick, let's see if I can share my slides to you all. It's really nice to be here. I wish we were all gathering in Rab Hall at the BPL, but maybe next time. We're looking forward to hopefully welcoming people back on what schedule we don't yet know, but hopefully it will be not too long. Let's see if I can bring this up. Everybody see that okay? Awesome, cool. Well, again, thanks to Karen and Jamie for having me here. And I want to start by thanking the whole Emerald Necklace Coalition staff for inviting me to the meeting. It's really a privilege to be here with a group that does such important work for Boston's open space, and also to share this stage with two of the city's most creative landscape architects, Marie and Dan Adams from Landing Studio. So I've given my remarks this evening a title which is deliberately meant to invoke the most boring stereotypes about what geographers do, and that is, where is the emerald necklace? By the end of this short presentation, I hope I will have convinced you both that this is a much more interesting question than it seems at first, and also that the geographer's great framing question of where is about much more than the coordinates on a map. And in this case, it invites us to think about themes of landscape, locality and linkage. So I want to begin by addressing that question in its most naive form, which is to say, literally, where is the emerald necklace? Presumably most of you, since you've chosen to spend a summer evening here in front of your computer screen with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, have at least a reasonable ability to pick out the emerald necklace on a map of Boston. But for many Bostonians, even those who may live only a few paces from this jewel of the city's civic ornamentation, the question might be a bit more of a stumper. And I want to interject here to say that we shouldn't jump to a conclusion, which I hear all the time as a curator of a map center, which is the complaint that kids don't know how to read maps anymore. It's certainly true that we have a lot of work to do in equipping people of all ages with better tools to understand the world geographically. But this alone doesn't account for the fact that too many Bostonians could not tell you where the emerald necklace is, and certainly many, many more could not tell you where Charles Gate is. Instead, it's because the localities that become important in people's lives are determined by a complicated geography of social experience and cultural meaning. And these are geographies for which mere proximity is not always a major determining factor. So it's not a problem of marketing. The coalition, working with its colleagues in the various parks departments, has done an excellent job of branding the emerald necklace as it makes its way through parts of Boston. Many of us on this call, I'll probably also know that the emerald necklace, with its innovative Olmsted design and its connection to the Olmsted successor firms, is world famous to students of landscape architecture and urban design, as well as a landscape that figures prominently in the imaginations of civic reform, both in the past and today. So this brings me to the question of locality. Whose neighborhood exactly is the emerald necklace in? We're all familiar with the figure of the NIMBY, the not in my backyard bugbear of housing reformers and developers alike. But there's a corollary to the NIMBY formula, which is that people tend to care about the places which are conceptually in their backyard. So whose backyard is the emerald necklace in? Well, for some Bostonians, it's literally not in their backyard because it wasn't completed. Of course, many of you know that the route down Columbia Road through Dorchester towards the Marine Park was never completed for many complicated reasons. But also this makes the emerald necklace much more of a sort of emerald brooch than an emerald necklace. The emerald necklace is literally not there in places where it had originally been proposed. Charles Gate is another one of these, a place where the emerald necklace still exists, but has been overlain by subsequent urban activity and development. So for some people, their backyard, the places they care about in their backyard literally do not include the emerald necklace. But probably more importantly for a city like Boston are these uneven social, economic, and racial geographies, which put the emerald necklace in a place where it can literally be in people's backyards and nevertheless still deeply inaccessible to them. Here's a very quick choropleth map of household income in Boston. Of course, the emerald necklace runs about here. And you can see it weaves its way through a center of extreme economic inequality. The dark purple areas on this map have household incomes below $20,000 a year, and the dark green areas have household incomes above $200,000. So literally an order of magnitude as you cross from one side of the necklace to the other. As Karen foreshadowed, and as we all know, these economic geographies also map onto racial geographies. Again, here's the emerald necklace. The maroon colors, the darkest maroon are more than 95% white, and the darkest green colors are less than 1% white. So utterly different racial geographies as we move from one side of the emerald necklace to the other. So understanding the literal where of the emerald necklace is much more than just drawing a boundary around the properties that are controlled by the DCR and the various parks departments and Harvard in the case of the Arnold Arboretum. It's also about understanding these microgeographies of difference that radically shape ordinary individuals' understanding of their own community. And so if understanding one part of this where question takes us into a microgeography of breaking down the city into smaller and smaller parts, it also takes us in the other direction towards a geography of regional interconnection. Now, that's something that the necklace's original creators understood very well, since hardly a decade passed between the necklace's original construction and the subsequent proposals for a more ambitious system of interconnected parks, which the Olmsted firms had a large part in. The creation of the Metropolitan District in the 1890s, which was an attempt to reckon with the fact that a much larger geography of interconnection demanded a regional approach to public amenities. Inventions like the electric street railway and the telegraph had made everything in everyone's backyard. Those transformations have only accelerated over the past 100 years. And now when we think about a very small place, get back to my slides here, a very small place like Charlesgate shown here, who should care about Charlesgate? Should it just be the immediate neighbors, the people whose property literally abuts this? Should it be the hundreds of thousands of commuters who pass over the Mass Pike or Starwood Drive or the various commuter rail lines and street railway lines that run past here? There are ecological flows which tie Charlesgate to a much larger metropolitan area, from the water that runs from the uplands down into the Charles River to, of course, the questions about air pollution, which cover a much larger geography. So if on the one hand we need to go inward and think about the fine texture of Boston's geography, we also need to go outwards. And since in some ways a global landscape, not yet a UNESCO heritage site, maybe it will be someday, but it certainly has international significance. So what sorts of geography of care should feed into a place like the Emerald Necklace? Should it only be residents of Brookline and Boston, Jamaica Plain and Roslindale, or should people from the rest of Massachusetts, the rest of New England, the rest of the world also care about the Emerald Necklace as well? And that's why when we're thinking about a place as physically small as Charlesgate, we have to pull apart all of these complicated geographic relationships to understand its where. I can drop a pin on a map to tell you that the most obvious answer to where Charlesgate is, but thinking about its relationality to these other social, economic, cultural, and ecological systems is of utmost importance if we're going to treat that where question seriously. Now, if the where question takes us to both these small and large geographies, it also tips into another question about time. Where and when is the Emerald Necklace and Charlesgate? It's not an unchanging landmark fixed in time like a mountain peak, but it's historically contingent based on the decisions of institutions and people who have shaped this landscape over time. Here's an 1876 plan in our collections at the Boston Public Library. Just before Olmsted became involved with this Boston project, it shows a radically different vision for what might have happened here. This is the Muddy River you can see being traced out here. This is Parker Hill, a very different proposal for a green parkway going towards Jamaica Pond. What eventually was developed, of course, we think of as a natural landscape today because of its greenness. It's cleverly designed by Olmsted to seem as though an always already existing ecological design. But in fact, it's the result of considerable artificial intervention over time. Long before Olmsted, the Back Bay Flats of Boston were the site of what might have been one of the largest human intervention projects in the New World, which were the fish weirs of the Massachusetts people. The city archaeologists did some amazing work at looking at how extensive these weirs were, really a radically transformed human landscape even before European colonists had ever arrived in the New World. But of course, the dramatic transformations in the Emerald Necklace that we look at today are largely the result of 19th century urban planning. The next set of maps that I'm going to show you are from a really cool new web tool that we put together. You can browse it for yourself at atlascope.leventhalmap.org. We've taken about 100 highly detailed atlases of Boston history and put them into a really fun and easy to use web interface. You can use it on your phone as you're walking around if you're in some of these parks. But all of what I'm about to show you comes from that Atlascope interface. Here's the Back Bay in 1873. Just to orient you, Beacon Street is running right across here. And here's what that looked like. This is a photograph of the Back Bay from the dome of the State House in about 1856 or 57. That, just behind this, this gatehouse is, that's about where Comm Ave and Mass Ave meet today. And so Charlesgate is just to the right of that. And if we go back to this 1873 map, you can see that there was a check dam here. This is where the tidal flat, the water that were backed up by the tidal flats were released to harness the water power. And that's basically just east of where Charles Gate is today. So what we now talk about as Charles Gate, of course, was mud flats. Looking at this photograph about where my cursor is right here. And as I walk you through these next series of about a dozen subsequent maps of the Charles Gate area, I want you to pay attention to the sort of transforming contingency of this landscape. Here's 1882, just as the Back Bay project was completing and the Olmsted firm was becoming involved with the Back Bay Park system. 1884, 1890, 1895, 1902, 1908, 1912, 1917, 1928, and finally 1938, just after the Star embankment had been completed, and just before the Bowgar overpass was put in, again transforming this landscape into much of what we see today. And so just if I play these in kind of rapid succession to one another, you can see that not only has this quote unquote natural landscape changed over time, but the human and physical infrastructure around it has changed as well. Between 1908 and 1912, we get Fenway Park built. You can see the kind of creep of residential development westward from Back Bay into what's now the BU area. And all the while, this designed landscape is responding to these changes, right? It's still, of course, accommodating ecological flows. Water is pouring out year after year after year. But also humans are transforming it for purposes that accommodate not only recreation, transportation, ecological management, sewerage, all of these complicated questions layered on top of one another. So I'm going to leave it at that, in that these maps are meant to be somewhat of a prelude to Marie and Dan's work. But I want to return again at the end to this sort of where question, to think about answering seriously that question of where is the Emerald Necklace, where is Charles Gate. We have to do much more than just kind of circle it on an outline map. We have to think about who and what and why, what are the processes that have transformed it over time? How has it related to different scales of geography and different geographies of both material and material connection and meaningful cultural representation? And those are the kind of questions which I think help us address the future. What will Charles Gate and the Emerald Necklace become? I'll leave it there. I promised to Karen that I would keep it brief. These slides that I just showed are available at this link, leventhalmap.org/ENC-2020-slides. If you want to download them and look at them yourselves. They also have links to our digital collections if you want to see any of those maps in greater detail. I think we're going to do questions at the very end. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. So we'll
Great.
do questions at the end, and I'll have Karen introduce Dan and Marie.
Oh, yes. So do I need to go back to my PowerPoint, or you're? So share screen. Is that right? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So clearly this project is a large-scale transformational project, which has implications to Boston, our region, and I guess the globe. Thanks, Garrett, for that. We are continuing to work on this project and hope to see many of you at upcoming meetings. To talk a little bit about our next presenters, Dan and Marie Adams are both the principals, architects at Landing Studio, the firm that we're working with on this project. They've been with us from the start. They are an architecture, design, and research practice that focuses on improving urban infrastructure and the public realm. You might recognize their work from the project under the Interstate 93 in the Ink Block area of the South End, where they also were dealing with a lot of the challenges that are posed by roadways. Dan is the director of the School of Architecture at Northeastern, and Marie Law Adams is a lecturer in urban design at MIT at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. They've been amazing partners on this project. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Karen, for the introduction. My name is Marie Law Adams.
And I'm Dan Adams.
And as a continuation of what Garrett showed so beautifully with the Leventhal map collection, we also wanted to start with a question of where is Charles Gate today, which of course suggests that something might be lost. And as you can kind of see by looking at this photograph of Charles Gate that was just taken maybe a year ago or so, that Charles Gate Park really doesn't look so much like a park anymore. But it was definitely designed as part of the Emerald Necklace Park system and was based on a series of very radical ideas at that time in terms of the integration of human mobility connections, open space, and with natural processes such as water management. So what we're going to do today is retrace what's happened since then, what Charles Gate is today, and what the emerging community-led vision is for the future through a series of stories about Charles Gate's land, water, and people.
So we're actually just to sort of, I guess, say what's so unique about Charles Gate and the Emerald Necklace. We actually wanted to just step away from the Emerald Necklace a little bit to look at what else was happening around the world at this time. And this is a map that's, I'm sure, famous to many people here, which is often referred to as the Ville map, which is a sanitary and topographic map of Manhattan. And I think what you can see here that's a pretty amazing aspect of the map is the overlay of the original topography and river system that was on Manhattan at the time before the iron grid. And of course, as we jump to today, we see that that sort of system is gone. And in fact, it's not gone. The rivers, the flow of water from clouds to the river to the ocean, of course, remains and it persists, but that now exists underground in a completely sort of different format. And what I think Garrett laid out so well is that that's, of course, not what Olmsted did, and it's not what the city of Boston did with the muddy river. And in many ways, this vision is far more complex as opposed to, so let's say, putting the water underground, out of sight, out of mind, out of ecosystems. The muddy river was maintained as a river, and in fact made into a river from what was once the tidal salt marshes of the area. So this was a constructed urban infrastructure, and it was a constructed urban nature that in many ways absorbs many more complexities than a simple pipe underground. And I think what we find so compelling about this infrastructure is that notion of integration. And here you're seeing a more zoomed in plan drawing, a beautiful drawing of the Fens area. And you see immediately the kind of nature of its integration, where it's a designed ecosystem for habitat, for flood swelling during major rain events. You see how this integrates with all the infrastructure of the surrounding urban fabric. So that this is both about transportation of vehicles and horses at the time, but it's also for people as pedestrians, it's for the flow of water and the flow of fish, it's for the protection of the city against flooding. And you can see how Olmsted was trying to reconcile these differences of working through the kind of naturalistic organic forms of the fens and how that becomes more orderly and organized with the urban fabric at its periphery. And so at the time, this is in the vicinity, and again, we need to thank Parker James. So many of these images have come from his efforts to assemble the history of this site, which is a great resource for us today. This is an amazing vision of what a park is. I think so often, this is not a lawn, this is not, it's an ecosystem functioning as a park. And in this case, in very much a pond. And so this is actually what Charles Gate looked like in the late 19th century. And it was a highly celebrated environment. It was obviously a beautiful ecosystem and a beautiful park, as we're saying, but it was also a landmark of the city, ornamented with some of the most sort of beautiful architecture, but also a way the city wanted to promote itself. And then you see the name Charles Gate, we also find really compelling, sort of gateway to what? In some ways it was the gate, of course, for managing the flow of water, but it was also really a gateway for how the city made connection to its broader ecosystem. In this case, the Charles River, which connects to the harbor. At this time, it was actually tidal, so it was truly a gateway to the ocean and the world beyond. Quite literally, you look across the Charles and you see this direct connection to MIT and Cambridge beyond. So Charles Gate was this sort of doorway to the world beyond. And I think, again, as Garrett laid out, the Emerald Necklace is part of a bigger regional park system. But in itself, how it ties to the Esplanade, it ties to the Commonwealth Avenue Mall. As Karen laid out, so often Charles Gate isn't even conceived as a piece of the Emerald Necklace. And here we see that in many ways it could be understood as perhaps, you know, one of the most critical pieces of the Emerald Necklace, because it's sort of a junction point, what we often refer to as a critical link, where the Esplanade ties to the Emerald Necklace, ties to Commonwealth Avenue, creating really a key link in this entire park network for the region. And I think one thing that's pretty exciting is since that time, that sort of importance has only grown as we've invested as a community in the Harbor Walk, in the Charles River Reservation, so that now we actually end up with a network of, you know, a hard-earned network of pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, often along the waterfront, stretching all the way from Quincy to Watertown and beyond. And how then that ties down through the Emerald Necklace to Mattapan, Roslindale, Roxbury, and then the missing link, highlighted here in pink, is Charles Gate. So the question is, that we come back to is, so this is the significance of this site, the importance of this site. So sort of how did we get here where this has really been sort of erased as a park or as a network or as an ecosystem for the city? And Garrett's maps took us into 1938. And so then we looked just 10 years after this. And this is an amazing aerial. This aerial was probably itself taken in the mid 1960s, early 1960s. An amazing aerial because it really captures the moment of what's often referred to as urban renewal in the city. And I think it's interesting to stitch all these projects together. I think there's a lot of familiarity with the West End or the Central Artery, which you see sort of to the upper part of the image. You also see the Tobin Bridge, which has recently been constructed. You see the kind of gash cutting through the city for the extension of I-90 into Boston. And down on the bottom, often not thought of as connected to the rest of these projects, is Sturrow Drive and the Boker Overpass, which were built sort of towards the, well, the Boker for sure, towards the end of this sort of era of massive infrastructural transformation that dramatically changed the fabric of the city. And interestingly, you know, at that same time here, you have a sort of ambitious postcard sort of promoting a certain image of that, almost a highway type park space itself, sort of emphasizing the green space of Sturrow Drive. Interestingly, you can even see a small piece of the Muddy River sort of trapped within Sturrow Drive. And so in the late 1960s here, you see Charles Gate now with a new vision, you know, kind of overtaken by the significance of the roadway infrastructure and the bridges, starting to dramatically remake that landscape, filling in the water, removing the sort of public realm, and replacing that with the elevated roadway system. And so as we look back at that same image, this is that view today, slightly elevated now on the Boker Overpass, the sort of transformation that took place here at this critical link of the Emerald Necklace. And I think an often untold story of this that I think in our research in thinking about a more contemporary design is kind of what it was the fact that at this time there was a park, a significant investment in a public domain to go alongside these roadway improvements by the firm Maurice and Gary, which actually happens to be architects of a great park we love in Cambridge, Danahy Park, for those of you who may know, former landfill park. And we've tried to really analyze this to understand kind of like what happened, where'd this go? Why would a major investment like this have occurred and then disappear? And some of our sort of observations here as we've dug through the kind of archival drawings of that project, interestingly, you start to notice in this landscape design, there's actually no representation of the roadways up above, for example. It's as if the park was designed with no sort of conception of the highway. Interestingly, as opposed to, let's say, Olmsted's ambitions of pathways that would move through a park system to connect you to point A to point B, here actually you just start to see these kind of elliptical geometries that almost just like take you back to the place you started. So they don't connect you from one place to another. So they're kind of like dead ends. Interestingly, as we've traced the history of projects and drawings through this site, you start to discover these drawings that during different, like, let's say, maintenance projects or improvement projects, in this case, the necessary dredging for flood protection of the muddy river, you look at all the listings of sort of remove the trees, remove the bricks, remove the steps. We had to get these things out of the way to dredge the river. And you start to get the kind of story of a significant park that was rebuilt in the 1960s, incrementally being erased bit by bit over time. For those of you familiar with the area, these are often referred to as the Jetson benches, for example, that still existed in that time in 2002. And so the more we kind of look at this archive of transformation, you can see how, oh, in 1999, it's almost the inverse, Garrett, of what you showed, the building of a city. There's sort of a interesting kind of like, here's, you know, about 10 years later, you know, the light posts are gone, the trees are gone, the path is gone, the benches are gone in a 10-year period. And as we even watch today, we see in many ways why this is this is not just a park, it is an infrastructural landscape. And so to maintain and manage that infrastructural landscape, there's a huge need to recognize those requirements for maintenance. And how do we design that into a landscape so that basic maintenance isn't sort of destroying the landscape that we aim to preserve? And so we find ourselves here again, back today, back to this erased landscape in many ways as the culmination of all these intrusions in the past. Oh, I thought we were transitioning. This is still me. So that's the sort of story of the land. This is also the story of the water. And what you see happening here is a lack of reconciliation. Again, where maybe the genius of Olmsted was to think about how the landscape and the park was designed in concert with the water systems. Here we see a real break, right? So no longer are we thinking about the park as something that could filter, manage, defend against flooding. Now we're actually seeing a direct intrusion of contaminants directly injected into the river. And for anyone who lives in the area or passes this river, they're very familiar with this site, is the common algae blooms and duckweed blooms that sort of show that changing chemistry and those inundations, right? So that now, out of that disjunction, where Olmsted had a true integration between these systems, out of this disjunction, you see the sort of harmful impacts on the river that infrastructure today has. So that's a stormwater story. Here, what you see is a transformation of the landscape where at one time, the Charles River and the Muddy River were one continuous ecosystem, one continuous watershed. With the construction of Sturrow Drive, a major transformation here is that what was once a river and an exchange of riparian habitats now became a purely culverted connection. So the last 270 feet of the Muddy River, which you could consider the most kind of critical, was culverted, preventing any kind of habitat exchange between these two waterways. So again, this being the kind of vision pre-1950 of that relationship, and this being that relationship today, where the Muddy River has really been reduced to a series of portals in the side of a concrete bulkhead. From a habitat perspective, we've observed this and documented, and we always find this almost even, you can watch the duck think about going up the Muddy River and change its mind, because who would possibly head down that kind of dark alley?
The Charles Gate is most definitely a story of the people, and the Charles Gate Alliance, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, all of us here are certainly not the first people to know that there's a problem at Charles Gate with the erasure of the park over time. Back in 1998, a whole coalition of people came together to re-envision what Charles Gate Park was. A lot of those people are still involved with the project today. There's evidence, both in physical documents, there's evidence online, the old Facebook page of Friends of the Charles Gate, another group of people who are really dedicated to trying to improve and recover this park space. And then that brings us to 2017 with the founding of the Charles Gate Alliance with Pam Beal and Parker James and their coalition that they built with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. And you can just see here this kind of growing network of public agencies, environmental advocates, neighborhood groups, coming together and saying, how can we make this place better? And for a lot of reasons, we do believe that the time is now, that this park can actually transform and update the Olmsted vision for today and the future. We started working with the Charles Gate Alliance and the Emerald Necklace Conservancy in 2017. And ever since then, we've been having regular meetings with the community, working really hard on developing a vision about what this place should be in the future. This has led to a series of 5 guiding principles that kind of are showing us a roadmap of what we want to do here to kind of restore all of these ecological, human mobility, and open space goals. With number 1, improving the Muddy River water quality and habitat, activating the site with new uses as a place that's under an overpass. It's not just grass and benches that will really activate this area, but there has to be a reason to invite you there. And that's what the community has identified as a priority. Number 3, reconnect all of Boston's park systems at this one critical juncture and the neighborhoods that are separated by Charles Gate today. 4, something that is really important, we've been working really hard on recently, design for maintenance. As we've seen, as Dan has shown, the kind of erasure incrementally over time at Charles Gate is really because the park wasn't designed in harmony with the overpass above. And so how can we change that in the new design for it? And then number 5, celebrate the history of Charles Gate and bring back this vision for the integration of all of these systems here in this one place in the city. Meanwhile, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, the DCR, and the Charles Gate Alliance have been shepherding along short-term improvement projects over the last 3 years. Olmsted era railings have been replaced. For 2 years, the Charles Gate Alliance has piloted a chairs project, which has really shown us how much Charles Gate does work in certain areas as people kind of go to sit out in front of the river. Other improvements like fixing lighting. The first movie night happened last summer with support from the Solomon Foundation due to a grant from the Fenway Park and the BPDA under Margaret Picorni. There has been tree pruning, which has improved the trees around Charles Gate. And then in 2019-2020, Charles Gate Alliance has hired Project Place to help with ongoing cleanups in the area, which has made Charles Gate Park look better than it has in a long time. We're also really grateful for some of these really big milestones that have been achieved in terms of the longer term planning effort. There was an initial matching fund from the Solomon Foundation to kick off the concept design process. And then in 2019, the project was the recipient of a $250,000 earmark in the Commonwealth's budget, thanks to Representatives Brownsberger, Livingstone, and Rushing, and John Santiago has been a part of this project ever since then. And then also in 2019, the project was awarded a Community Preservation Act from the City of Boston. So we have all of the money together for design, and now the fundraising effort for the capital improvements are underway.
So I think part of why this is just so timely and in many ways fortuitous that the group has come together, and I think as Karen said, why we think this is the critical time that, you know, despite past efforts, this will be a time of transformation here, is that there are in fact multiple significant projects happening in the area. 2 of which, what are labeled here as numbers 1 and 3, are Mass Department of Transportation led infrastructure reconfiguration and reconstruction projects, in which case the Emerald Necklace and Charles Gate Alliance is really serving a critical advocacy role. And in area 2, this is really the piece that connects those projects together as a major community resource. So to speak about what kind of the advocacy goals are in areas 1 and 3, sort of in alignment with the goals that the Charles Gate Alliance and Emerald Necklace Conservancy have developed, is maximize environmental restoration, including the daylighting of the Muddy River and improved stormwater management, creating the best possible ped-bike connections between the Emerald Necklace and Esplanade to restore that regional resource of a park network, and then maximize parkland that becomes open and available. And so I think this is really to the credit of the Department of Transportation and actually a consulting engineering firm named Gill Engineering that's working on this. And I think in concert with Hearing Charles Gate Alliance and Emerald Necklace has really been thinking creatively about how to accomplish those goals. The project in this area with Sturrow Drive is quite simply to rebuild the dashed line bridge that's shown here. And in a typical project, if we didn't have such creative engineers on the Department of Transportation, you would simply build a temporary bridge, move traffic onto that bridge, demolish the bridge, and then build a brand new permanent bridge. But the engineers looking at this realized, why build a temporary bridge at great expense? What if we built 2 permanent bridges instead of a permanent bridge and a temporary bridge, 2 permanent bridges? Would that allow us to move the westbound traffic of Sturrow Drive away from the river, thereby opening up a huge amount of space to the Esplanade, and equally lifting those roadways so that new connections could be made underneath Sturrow Drive to connect Beacon Street back to Sturrow, or back to the Esplanade. And I should say this is an oversimplification, because there's of course on-ramps and off-ramps. That is what is currently being evaluated by the DOT and their engineers to assess what's the best possible connections that can be achieved here. And through the advocacy of Emerald Necklace Conservancy and Charles Gate Alliance, the goal is to then consider what are the best possible connections that we can make between the Emerald Necklace and that increased Esplanade, and what are the types of environmental improvements that could be achieved here, like the daylighting of the last 270 feet of the Muddy River, restoring those ecologic connections between the Charles River and the Muddy River, which in fact, I think as Garrett said so nicely, is not just about a local small scale 270-foot improvement, but is about improving the water quality, habitat value, and flood management of a 4-mile long water course in the city of Boston. And so for just greater clarity, this is the kind of current condition of the Muddy River as it hits Olmsted's historic Fens Pond Bridge, transitions to a subgrade culvert, and the question is, how do we start to open that up to continue and restore the Muddy River as a river? The other project that's being sort of on the table soon is this connection over I-90. And again, this is a small piece in the city, but a critical break in the Emerald Necklace. You can see in the image here that the only connection of the Emerald Necklace going north is a very sort of minor sidewalk. You can see kids here trying to make their way over to the Mother's Rest playground. As they proceed, that sidewalk only gets narrower and narrower, becoming sort of trapped between a missile fence and roadways. The east side is no better. In this case, the sidewalk sort of drops you down into a small, peninsula amongst heavy traffic. It doesn't even sort of meet standards for accessibility and width for wheelchairs. And this is the Emerald Necklace. And so this is a sort of a critical weak point in the Emerald Necklace.
And so we're going to wrap up by focusing on this middle project, which is really what the effort with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy and the Charles Gate Alliance is to lead design, fundraising, and short-term improvements. This is really the area that's the center of the neighborhood and where we can kind of bridge the gap between the 2 infrastructure projects on the north and south sides. So as I said that earlier, we're using these guiding principles, and we'll just walk through these very quickly to show you what the Charles Gate Park Revitalization Project is looking to do, starting with improve the Muddy River water quality and habitat. Today, this is what the edge of the Muddy River looks like. It is covered with paving on either side, and the project hopes to restore this to a natural edge, which will not only help with water quality, but also create habitat and opportunities to get closer to the water. Additionally, the stormwater management and drainage issue that you saw earlier in the presentation in terms of the water draining directly from the overpass as well from the surface roads is something that can be treated with nature-based solutions such as bioretention basins. You can see an image on the top right there where this can become an amenity for education as well as bringing nature back into the park, and it cleans the water before it enters into the Muddy River. So this is a major piece of the project. And one of the complexities of figuring out how to do this is, of course, all of the different public agency jurisdictions that come together at Charles Gate. You can see by the number of different colors here how many different players are involved in the different ways that their waters combine before they go into the Muddy River. And so we've been spending a lot of time recently trying to to retrace all of these things and begin to simplify this so that we don't have such a mess of complex different systems happening over each other, but that we can pull them apart, simplify, and really create much more clear maintenance responsibilities for the DCR, the DOT, and Boston Water and Sewer, all who have drainage in this area. And this doesn't look very simple, but it is actually a big simplification of what is there today. Secondly, to activate the site with new uses, and two of the major kind of not amenities here are a playground in the north end and a dog park in the south. In addition to opportunities for passive recreation with benches along pathways to enjoy the space of the muddy river. The playground itself is this kind of intense node of activity here between Beacon Street and Commonwealth Avenue. And you can see that it will be one of the largest playgrounds in the area, which is a very exciting amenity due to the kind of connectivity issues in this area. The project also proposes to dismantle some of these walls that really kind of create a sense of disorientation, break up the space, not only visually, but also physically, so that you can see through it and really reclaim all of this for recreation. And then the dog park area is a really kind of wonderful way to create almost 24-hour activity on the site, and also kind of relieves pressures that are being placed on other nearby parks in the area because there is not enough dog park facilities in this neighborhood. And so you can see again that this will be one of the largest dog parks in Boston. Some of the only ones that kind of compete in size are out in Somerville and Cambridge. And again, in this case, the project proposes to dismantle one of these walls that was built in the 1960s, which really kind of obstructs and breaks up the space. We can reclaim that and add that to the dog park area. And then finally, this idea of restoring the connectivity of the landscape, bridging that gap between the projects that DOT is doing on either side. You can see right now today an image on the left of what it takes to move from Newberry Street to Beacon Street, 8 separate crossings at roadways, and you're never moving through park space, even though this is the Emerald Necklace. On the right is the proposed design. That gets reduced to 3 times that an individual would cross the street, and you spend most of your time in parkland, which would be an amazing improvement in this area. Connectivity is also missing in terms of the ecological connectivity or the tree canopy at Commonwealth Avenue, one of Boston's major parkland gems. You can see on the right how full and lush the tree canopy is, and then on the left what happens at Charles Gate. And so this project is looking at ways to kind of bring that back there in terms of tree cover and shade in the area. Then this idea of designing for maintenance, being able to bring the bucket trucks from DOT in to inspect the bridge for repairs and maintenance. And how do you do that in such a way that it doesn't destroy the park? How do you clean up the river in a way that doesn't destroy the park? And so one of the central pathways that moves through the dog park and into the playground area will also double function as an access way for maintenance. You can kind of see that space created underneath the overpass so that it will not result in the same kind of erasure of the park over time. And then finally, this idea that we want to celebrate the history of Charles Gate Park. And there's not only a series of these relics that are left over in Charles Gate from Olmsted's era and from Surecliff, and then the Fens Pond Bridge up in the north area. But really, I think what we want to focus on in this project is celebrating the kind of historic idea that Olmsted brought to the Emerald Necklace and restore it as a place that integrates spaces for people, human mobility connections, open space, and water infrastructure. And that's where we're going to leave it today. Thank you very much for having us.
Great, thank you so much, Dana Marie. I'll have Karen close it out and then we'll open up to Q&As. I realize we are past time. If anyone's been to our annual meeting before, you know this is pretty typical. We just get very passionate. So thank you so much for staying on, those of you who are still with us. If you do have to jump off, we are recording this, as I mentioned, so we will send it out afterwards so you can make sure to tune in to all of the Q&As. So now I'll just turn it over to Karen, and then I'll just ask, if you do have a question, you can either put it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, or you could also raise your hand in the participants and we'll open it up and people can verbally ask questions if they would like. So I'll turn it over to Karen for a second, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, Dan, Marie, Garrett, for taking the time. I know we always have more to say than there is time for. But we did want to keep this short. But I really do appreciate all of the time and effort that you've been spending on this project and these questions. And I also really have to thank the community, Charles Gate Alliance, and our public partners. DCR and DOT. This is a very I think an aspirational project. And we're in meetings where people are saying, how do we take this project from good and maybe make it extraordinary? And it's a pretty wonderful place to be. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the elected officials that continue to support this. I want to thank all of the supporters of the Conservancy that help us do this work. Also, I really have to thank my staff who are all working in a very challenging, remote, and sort of jumping in and out of parks from time to time right now sort of way. And I just really want to thank all of you. I think we should get to a couple of questions, and then I think we're planning on we can be here till 7:30 or a little after. I'm happy to stay for as long as people would like to ask questions. I saw there were a couple. Jamie, did you want to help serve a couple of questions up to the presenters?
Definitely. So looks like we have Barbara Millen is raising her hand, so I'm going to unmute you, Barbara, and you can ask a question. Barbara, you should be unmuted.
Am I unmuted now?
We can hear you.
Hi. No, thank you for the presentation. It was really just wonderful. And I guess the one comment I would make is that the mapping that was shown earlier, Garrett, and also Karen, if we could have some of the wonderful outlining that the Adams both did, on their maps to really show the before and after, and to make it very clear, the areas that we're talking about would really be helpful. And I was also struck by the neighborhoods that still don't have access, and reminded of Olmsted's original plan to create the full necklace. And I think there was some comment about that, but I'd love to, this initiative is so important and so exciting, but there's also sort of a larger original goal that we ought to keep in the back of our minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
I want to respond to that. I know Chris Cook was planning on being here. He may still be here. The city of Boston and Mayor Walsh, it's more than in the back of their minds. They have actually funded the Columbia Road project and are starting to work towards that, about seeing how green space can be integrated into what is, of course, bustling, busy, important communities and neighborhoods and roads, and sort of doing that well is going to be a challenge, but it is an amazing effort that I think is supported by this city. So I think that there are some interesting things afoot there, and I look forward to that over the next couple of years. But those are all good comments. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
So we have a question in the Q&A that I will ask. This question is from the Authentic Caribbean Foundation, Andrew Sharp, good friends. Hi, Andrew, thank you for joining us. Andrew asks, with regards to catering to our communities of color in the Emerald Necklace areas, can you give me an update on some of the steps made, and also what future programs or actions is being done to reverse the disparity?
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew is a good friend and has been an amazing partner. We were actually planning a picnic in Franklin Park with communities around Franklin Park this year, and unfortunately had to cancel it. So I think we have to figure out what kinds of things we can make that are more resilient, going forward, so we can better engage communities and neighborhoods around the park. I think that a few things I'm thinking about and working on, developing a conversation within my organization and also outside my organization about how we can do this better. We have a board of overseers, essentially a gathering of friends groups from around the Emerald Necklace, but I don't think it's representative of all of the communities around the necklace. I think that we should think about how we meet, when we meet, how, what things we talk about, how we make space for voices that can't always be at the table. So I think that's one thing we need to think about. I think that the question about access and who can be in the park and how they can get to the park easily or not is something we should think about. These kind of parkways, I think, are formidable. And I think also what gets designed, what gets put in parks, how program decisions are made, I think are all things we need to really think on and look to partners and folks like you to see what are the kinds of needs that the parks are not meeting yet. I think there is some really exciting work in our midst with the investment that the city has made in Franklin Park. They have pledged $28 million for improvements that are going to be determined through a community process. And there's been a lot of outreach to try and get as many voices as possible in that process. And it's still in early phases. So I think there's an opportunity to think about how that can be the most collaborative. I think it really is about listening and hearing what people want in open space. What are they looking for? And trying to figure out if we've been providing it or not, and how can that be done differently. I think the Conservancy has certainly a role in communications and a role in providing programming, and there are ways that can be done better and worse, and more relevant and less relevant. So I think we're going to be thinking a lot about that and I hope to continue to work with you, Andrew, on that.
Great, thank you, Karen. Okay, let's see. I have another question here. This question is from Clay Harper. How important and for how long historically was the east, west, north, south recreational connection between the necklace and Commonwealth Mall to the denizens of the city? How important and for how long historically was the east?
Well, the connection, okay, I'm not sure if I'm totally following the question, but there was a bridge, a curving, gorgeous bridge that connected Commonwealth over the Mass, well, it wasn't the Mass Pike wasn't there, it was just a railroad, over to the Fenway, and that would have been in place from the 1880, 1890, and I don't know the precise date, through to, and Garrett, maybe you could help me, through till, I guess, 1950. When it was in 1938, we saw that on your map in 1938, and then so there was at least 60 or 70 years that connection would have been there, and that would have been a pattern, and it would have been safe and enjoyable to walk, and then that changed, and then at that same time you would have been able to also get out to what became known as the Esplanade. Garrett, do you want to?
Yeah, and I, if I'm also understanding the question correctly, I mean, certainly the conceptual design for the necklace was to connect Boston's 17th and 18th century public landscapes, the Common and the Public Garden, to its 19th century Romantic era parks like Franklin Park and the Arboretum. And of course, to make that connection, one has to go through Charlesgate. The Esplanade didn't exist at the time, so it was to go down Commonwealth Avenue and then from there. So certainly this, as Marie and Dan emphasized, this was a really nodal point in the necklace system, and without it, you don't have a necklace.
Yeah, I think the amazing opportunity here is, when you think that, you've got the Cambridge side of the Charles River as a major commuter and recreational corridor. You've got the Boston side of the Charles River with the Esplanade as a major corridor. You have a major corridor of commuting and recreational circulation on the Mass Ave Bridge. And then you have the Emerald Necklace, which is a major corridor for commuting by bicycle. And I should say, when I say commuting, I mean by bicycle or on foot, and recreational and bike. And the idea that you've got what are probably, it's hard to think of, like some of the city's most frequently used corridors for infrastructural movement, the fact that they don't tie together, though they all sort of come within hundreds of feet of each other, is such a sort of missed opportunity. I mean, it's often talked about that the Emerald Necklace created a connection all the way from the State House to Roxbury. Well, this extends that connection all the way to Watertown, you know, so and I think that's when it comes into questions of equity and value to the city, the idea that this is not simply a park, but a major infrastructural network that serves sort of the fundamental interests of how people are able to live sort of a healthy urban life. I think that's the genius of the project and the opportunity here of Charlesgate to stitch that back together.
If I can have just one more quick little thing, I won't bring up my screen again, but you know, Boston's a particularly unique city in that it both because of its physical landscape and its historic status, has some key geographic choke points, right? The where Charlesgate is, what the city and state are trying to figure out with the throat of Starrow Drive and the Mass Pike, you know, the decisions that are affecting those choke points go back to where rail and road lines were laid in the 18th, 19th centuries. So these kind of key points of getting in and out of the city, these kind of entrepôts of access to the city have a very deep historical legacy to them.
Thank you all. So we have a few more questions coming in.
I realize there's one thing we maybe haven't mentioned, and we have, and it's been talked about, but one thing that's so exciting is because this bridge is in bad shape and MassDOT has planned to replace that bridge in 2023, a project that was conceived to be $23 million now is upwards of $50 or $70 million, which is what Mass DOT presented the last time they gave, you know, a public presentation on this, you know, several months ago. So that project continues to be formed, be conceived, and sort of worked out. And I think we have this really exciting opportunity when that work is happening to also do something right by the rest of the park. And so that is why we are in this very fortunate time. And it's a very interesting thing that's happening all over the country, because that turn of this, you know, that mid-century infrastructure is all aging out right now. So we have choices to make about what those spaces are going to be like now, that, you know, perhaps we weren't, you know, otherwise you're trying to interrupt something in the middle of its life and do something. But now we have this moment where it has to be rebuilt. Things have to change. And now we have the opportunity to make sure that happens in the best way possible for the long-term life of the city and the ecology and all of these things.
Definitely. Okay, so another question from our Q&A from Taylor. What is the current state of the water quality at Charlesgate, and what improvements do you envision being made to improve it? I know Marie and Dan, you touched on that a little bit, so maybe you want to take this one.
I think I'm going to start off with just big picture. Sure. Muddy River is the second worst polluter to the Charles. At times it is the first worst, so the water quality is not good. So I think that these improvements will improve it. I think I'll let Dan and Marie kind of go into more of the specifics, but yes, it is not good now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we can do at Charlesgate Park to improve it, and using the landscape to do so. So the project currently proposes to manage all of the stormwater drainage off of the Boker overpass and run it through planted systems before it enters into the Muddy River. And then also to take as much of the surface roadway drainage as possible and to do the same thing. And that's something that, of course, we hope that happens across all of Brookline's watershed and Boston's watershed as well, because those are both contributing areas to the Muddy River. But in terms of the Charlesgate project itself, we're doing as much as possible right there locally to clean the water that is directly draining into the Muddy.
But I think you know, because this is a 4-mile water course, there's only so much we can do immediately to control, because a lot of the water is coming from the rest of the city of Boston, coming from Brooklyn. But I think one of the things that we find so kind of important and even kind of compelling about this project is that the Emerald Necklace has always served for engineers, landscape architects, as really a global model ahead of its time of green infrastructure and kind of humans finding ways to live in harmony with nature, let's say. And so the fact that it really was the pinnacle model, it remains the pinnacle model, but to be honest, so often the textbooks, they don't even talk about the sort of post-60s situation that undid so much of that. But the idea that we could here restore actually that model that has served as a global precedent since its construction is really hopefully a model that can be, you know, emulated throughout the city of Boston and Brookline, and people beyond, someone in the chat even mentioned in Australia. And yes, I mean, that is the model. And I mean, the Emerald Necklace was once the model for green infrastructure. It still is. Unfortunately, it is, in terms of how people talk about its conception in the 19th century, not its current condition today. And that is what we have the opportunity to start restoring, is that it is not a model of past good infrastructure. It is a model of contemporary good infrastructure. And this would be a huge step to sort of re-professing the Emerald Necklace as that model.
Well, and I will say that yes, this is what we can do here. There's some other cool things at work. There's a group called the Muddy Water Initiative that is planning to essentially provide a boom that would grab a lot of the pollutants and sort of pull them out of the water at a certain point. There's also the long-term Muddy River Restoration Project, which is an Army Corps project that's been supported by the Conservancy and all of the public agencies, the City of Boston, DCR, and Brookline over decades, you know, and that really came out of the flood that was experienced here in 1996. And over time, there are improvements. You know, the Emerald Necklace in front of the Landmark Center was daylit. That had been open in Olmsted's time, turned into a parking lot, and then through the efforts of Boston and everyone here and lots and lots and lots of advocacy, that got reopened. So we've seen it happen, and then water certainly got better as a result of that. And there are more incremental things we can do up and down the Emerald Necklace. This clearly is a huge choke point, because all that good work we do up here, it all has to flow through this final piece. So, you know, we definitely want the bang for the buck for everything we're doing, and this is an essential piece of that.
All right, we have 2 more questions on the chat, and it looks like one person's raised their hand, and then I think after that we'll have to cut it off. I want to answer the questions that we said we answered, but then if you have additional questions, you can email us or chat us, and we'll keep track of them, and then we can answer them at another time and reach out to you and make sure we get those questions answered. So the next question is about Charles Gate as well. What are the collaborators' ideas, so all of you guys, for making Charles Gate more inclusive? How can we bring diverse local, regional, and national visitors to the area given our current racial climate of unrest? So I'll pose that to the 3 of you.
I mean, that is a very good question. I think finding ways for people to feel welcome, for everyone to feel welcome, and to think about all of the uses of a space. I think providing opportunity spaces that can be flexibly used by different types of users is something that we have thought a little bit about in the design, and I think we should perhaps think of more, so that you know there could be more active performances and other things from folks from all over, instead of necessarily always only a dog park, or always, like, maybe there's ways to make some of these spaces flexible and more adaptable. I don't know, Marie and Dan, if you have any additional thoughts on that.
I think one of the biggest things, and you know, we've tried to hit on this a lot, but it really can't be said enough, is that Charles Gate is really the piece that unlocks Boston Region's Greenway network. And that is a resource for everyone in Boston, Watertown, Quincy, all of the neighborhoods and communities. No matter if you're in Roxbury, Dorchester, or in the Back Bay, it means that you have a way to get to each other and through the park system through a safe and an accessible way. And it kind of all falls apart in one place. And so we see this as a generational opportunity to repair that and to shift the model from really a roadway and vehicular driven design to something that is really driven by people. And that should benefit everyone in Boston.
Well, I think that's what's so powerful about Olmsted's vision, and even how this remains today, which is that this is, as much as it's a park, it is infrastructure, and it serves the base fundamental needs of the city, of all people of the city. You know, all people need clean water and want clean water. And this is a direct feed to the Charles River and Boston Harbor. And all people want a healthy way and a safe way to move through the city that avoids, you know, high speed traffic. And that's, I think, what is so kind of fundamental. And, you know, all people do not want their city to flood during a major rain event. So having a place for the water to breathe and ebb and flow is sort of a critical underlying element that holds us all together. So that's, I think, part of what makes this such a compelling project. It's not just about making something that serves a very local community. It's about how a piece of infrastructure can improve the functioning of the city at its very core.
And serve all of those neighborhoods.
Definitely. Great. Okay, the next question I think is mostly for Karen. Can you say more about this is from Mika Elugarda. Thank you for joining us, Mika. Can you say more about the youth programs and capacity to expand that? What partnerships are helpful and now and needed to grow? And are there university partnerships that are involved?
Great question. Thank you, Representative Elugarda, for being here. So yes, the expansion of our youth program has been enabled by the City of Boston, the Youth Employment Program. So they're the ones that I think they had to basically reinvent their model this summer and find ways to do everything digitally, including hiring students through the city's hiring program. I mean, you know, hats off to them reinventing how they do everything. So we were able to scale up. The organizations that we partner with for our summer program include Mattapan Health and Fitness, Southwest Boston CDC. So we work a lot with organizations around Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, and other neighborhoods that can also supplement the type of expertise we provide. We provide a lot of professional training, but also environmental education. But there's going to be a lot in this summer that will be around food and sort of agriculture and like sort of local food production, and also health and fitness and other things that our partners can bring in. The Arnold Arboretum has also partnered in the past and provided some classes. You know, we are going to have to do a little bit of a different model this year because it's going to be virtual, and we're trying to figure out how much time we can really expect teenagers to be in front of computers, and then how much can they do on their own, looking out a window or at a tree, you know, on their street, versus coming to the necklace. So we're still working on that. In terms of university partnerships, we haven't. I'm trying to think. I don't know that we have specifically partnered with the university community for our youth program, but that is an interesting idea, and maybe we should think about if there are ways we could do that. You know, I'm again really grateful that the City of Boston. I mean, I think the mayor said that he wanted to make sure as many kids that were employed last summer were employed this summer, and so a lot of us tried to do more, and you know, and City of New York canceled their summer program. So I think we should be really proud of the city trying to do that, because we know that this, you know, not just jobs, not just education, but also, you know, finances for a lot of folks that, you know, are having challenges financially right now. But maybe we can connect with Elugarda's office to find out more about what she's thinking about, because I think she has some ideas there. She probably does.
That would be great. Okay, Daniel Moon has a question and he has raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute you, Dan. And Dan, can you hear us? Should be unmuted.
Daniel Moon from the Environmental Business.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you. That was so exciting. You got such a great project to work on. The Adams family, they're going to be talking about you for years when you get this program implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Garrett, thank you. That was great. I love the map. I actually know where the Stony Brook River used to be. It's the first time I've actually seen a map of where the Stony Brook was. I'm glad you mentioned the daylighting at Landmark Center and the next project that the Corps is working on, which is a multi-million-dollar project. So I'm not sure which end of the Muddy River they're going. Are they going up or down from the Landmark Center?
Well, a little bit happens down, a little bit happens on the Brookline side of the Muddy River, but most of the additional flood capacity that will be created will be in the Back Bay Fens. Okay. So the precise schedule for that hasn't been released yet, but I know that we're going to apparently see a couple of construction trailers come over the next 90 days, and I'm working with the Muddy River Oversight Committee MMOC, Muddy River Operations and Care and Maintenance Oversight Committee,
Right.
to understand exactly where they're working and how they're working. I mean, this is a project that should not, increase flood capacity, but and also have lots of areas, I think, of restoration. And we'd like to, of course, see as many as possible.
So,
Did you have a particular question about that?
No, I just wanted to, I actually wanted you to sort of let everybody else know what was going on. I know a little bit. I mentioned the turkey trot earlier in one of my questions. And for the first time, I went in the turkey trot last Thanksgiving, and it got me into Franklin Park, which I'd never been to before, and I realized how gorgeous it is. One of the things in terms of integration is that it's a white race. Everybody in the race is white. There's no minority activity in the race, and we're in the middle of Roxbury. So it's something that really needs to be targeted and worked on seriously, I think, in my mind anyway. I could go on forever, but I wanted you to talk a little bit about the tree trimming and where you're going to be doing all that. I'm curious. For the first time ever, I walked the length of the Muddy River up to Jamaica Pond, and it needs a lot of work.
Great. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome.
So the Turkey Trot is organized by the Franklin Park Coalition. So definitely I will, relay any feedback you have, and certainly, I know the coalition's an extremely diverse group, so I'm a little surprised to hear that, but it's always good to sort of think about how we can expand our reach and what we do and what our amazing partners do. The Franklin Park Coalition is a long-term amazing steward for Franklin Park. In terms of where we're going to be doing tree pruning, we have been doing that work, a lot of work this year in the Back Bay Bends. There's a little bit more planned for the Riverway. There is a section around Jamaica Pond that actually has not been looked at for a while and might be something we could do more accessibly now, because there's a section of Parkman Street that's been closed, might be part of the area that you're thinking about. A lot of this work is slated for Franklin Park. There are, I think almost 1,000 trees that could be pruned, that will be inspected, and many of them have probably not been pruned in a long time. And so that's where we're going to be spending a lot of that time this summer. And we're working with Franklin Park Coalition to make sure that we can, shift crews, if there are events or other things that we need to kind of move people around. But this tree help work is both for safety, but also for the longevity of the lives of a lot of these trees.
Thank you.
We still have 55 people on. That's amazing. It's 7:45.
We do.
Wonderful. But we maybe one more question, then we'll need to let people have dinner.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So Jen Mergel. Hello, Jen. I will unmute you now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hi, Marie, and hi, Dan, and hi, Garrett, and hi, Karen. And these were phenomenal presentations. And I just want to put it on the record for your recording for the annual meeting. All of the amazing history about the urban planning and development of Boston that you both relayed in your presentations. Are there any in print or any published online accessible resources that folks can teach from or learn from for the general public to know that? Or will there be opportunities to share that information in the future? Garrett, I'm thinking of you having a platform for exhibitions. But just how can people learn this and share this more broadly?
Thanks, Jen. It's a great question. It's one of our big goals at the Map Center, certainly, is to be a resource for some of that stuff. We have an entire mini room full of both scholarly and popular books about the history of Boston. Unfortunately, it is behind closed doors as the BPL is not open right now. But there are some great resources out there. Some of them are linked to from our website, and we're trying to build more as well. Using maps as a portal into a lot of different questions about the history of Boston, from the community scale to the regional scale, and with a lot of different thematic elements to it. We've been talking potentially about an upcoming exhibition that the ENC and others might have some partnerships with. but I guess I don't want to name one text because there's so many, but the Mapping Boston book that is one of the publications that predates me at the Map Center, but it's still a really nice resource for thinking about the geographic history of Boston. And Nancy Seischel's new, just released last year, Atlas of Boston History is another really great overview that covers everything from glaciology to public transit.
I think this presentation is going to be on our website, so that's definitely available. But there is the Emerald Necklace Conservancy Visitor Center, and that could also be a place where we could display some of this information or have some of these books. So I think we should figure out ways that we can provide this, and also think about providing it to younger people in different formats too, digitally and otherwise. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I want to thank our panelists for jumping on and sharing all of that great information. Thank you all for your questions. Again, this will be recorded and we will send it out so everyone can enjoy it later and share with anyone else who might not have been able to make it tonight. I'll also just remind you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of that. Check out our website, see how you can volunteer with us and get more involved. We have a lot of stuff going on right now, even though we're all quarantined in our homes. We still have a lot going on and the parks are still open. So thank you all again so much for joining us, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your night, and we will see you soon. And join us on Friday for our webinar commemorating Juneteenth. So we hope to see you there too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.